Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel. And what a week it has been for Warhammer 40k fans. I'm not going to go through all of the new stuff that we've been given, but what I do want to talk about is how some of these new rules that have been talked about by the design team are going to impact our Imperial Knights. So I've been doing a series recently where I've been talking about getting started with Imperial Knights, building your super heavy detachments and so on. I've had to put that on pause just a little bit. I was going to do the Dominus and the Cerastus and the Acastus class next. Putting that on pause because a lot of these new rules are going to change the way that Imperial Knights work and my recommendations for that. So I'm going to kind of pause that until July, which is the rumoured date for 9th edition. So with that said, we're going to get into this video and just talk about some of the new rules that are coming and how that should impact our Imperial Knight forces. So let's get straight into the video. So the first rule I want to talk about is the new heavy rule. So when an infantry model shoots a heavy weapon, subtract 1 from the hit rolls when resolving that weapon's attack if the firing unit has moved for any reason this turn. Doesn't super affect knights, but this does affect a lot of people. So the previous edition, every model that moved that didn't have an overruling rule like Power of the Machine Spirit or the Super Heavy Walker rules or anything inbuilt to the profile of the weapon was always at -1 to hit if that model moved. In an infantry unit, if you had like a las cannon in a marine unit for example, all the other marines could do a little jig and move around providing that one guy didn't move and he would still be able to shoot at his regular ballistic skill. Now if any of those models move within that unit for an infantry model, now this is the big key change here, that means every vehicle, every dreadnought, every flyer that doesn't have any kind of overruling ability now does not have a -1 modifier. The only unit in the Imperial Knights Codex that really is impacted by this is the Armiger Knights Heavy Stubber, and that's about it. That's the only heavy weapon on an Armiger, because they don't have the ability to move and fire without the negative modifiers, because they don't have the super heavy vehicle rules. That's our only impact to this. But we do now need to be conscious of every other enemy that is going to be shooting at us, that they are not going to be -1 when targeting our big knights. And if you also think about the other Armiger weapons, the Armiger Helverin for example, their weapon, the Armiger autocannon ignores the minus as a weapon special rule, and the Warglaive, who has the thermal spear, that's an assault weapon, so that doesn't worry about it anyway. So as I said, it's the Armiger Heavy Stubber is the only thing that we now don't have to -1 to hit with. Obviously this also works with the Chaos Knights as well. But let's not talk about them too much. The impact for me though is also my House Raven rules. Now I do love to run my Knights as House Raven, which basically means I can move and then advance, and then not all my heavy weapons then become assault weapons, and I'm not -1 to fire with those assault weapons. I'm kind of losing out on a little bit of a rule there, but other than that, you know, this is where we're at. So the next rule I want to talk about then is the return of blast weapons as a category. Previous editions, before 8th in fact, blast weapons used to be marked with a template. So the little 3-inch template, was it 3 or 2.5? And the 5-inch template, and then there was some bigger templates for Apocalypse and so on. We don't have those anymore. It was kind of reduced into the rules to give a random number of shots, like D3, D6, 2D3, 4D3, 2D6. You know the deal. And there are now over 150 weapons that are in the new rulebook in a index at the very back. All of those weapons have now been given a blast weapon status. For Knights though, we can have a little sensible guess to the weapons that are impacted. Now this is kind of based on what the weapons were before and battle cannons and so on, that we kind of have a rapid fire battle cannon. These have kind of been talked around a little bit, but in my opinion this is I think it's a sensible supposition that some of these weapons are going to be blast weapons for us. I think that's going to be the thermal weapon, so the spear and the thermal cannon, the rapid battle cannon, the las impulsor, the plasma decimator, both at standard and supercharge, the volcano lance, because I believe Stu Black or Pete Foley mentioned volcano weapons in the chat they did, probably the Iron Storm missile pod, But remember, no flamers. Flamers will not be getting this rule. So the conflagration cannon and the heavy flamer that's built under the Avenger Gatling cannon, for example, would not be classed as a blast weapon. What does this actually mean for us? So units containing 6 to 10 models, you will get a minimum of 3 hits regardless of what dice roll you roll on that random number of shots. So that's like a mini horde. Units containing 11 or more models, you will get the full shots without needing to roll. You will still need to hit, wound, save and all the rest of it, but your rapid fire battle cannon, they did specifically mention, I believe, the battle cannons on a Lehman Russ example. Rapid fire battle cannon is 2d6. You are now, instead of getting anywhere between 2 and 12 shots against a horde of 11 plus orc boys that are running towards you, you will automatically get the full amount, the full 12 shots. That is a big change. Lots of other weapons are going to have that similar changes, but for a Night Force, you know, if you're facing that big horde, yes, you've got some super tough units, but you always struggle with enough kills to make your minimum number of units, because you've only got sort of 5 to however many armigers you can take, not very many models. Trying to impact the scoring of a game against a horde army, always super difficult. So now this gives us a bit of a chance. The downside to blast weapons, though, is that they cannot be fired within this new engagement range, which is basically the fancy word now for being within an inch of combat to enable combat. But of course, those flamers can, because they're not blast weapons. So the conflagration cannon and heavy underslung Gatling cannon, heavy flamer, are going to get those auto hits whilst in combat now. But talking of combat, we need to discuss what this new engagement ranges is and what changes this actually has for vehicles and monsters within combat. This new rule is called Big Guns Never Tire. The summary of this basically is vehicles and monsters can now fire into combat, something we've never been able to do before. This was an 8th edition bugbear for many players, that a single grot or a guardsman or whatever, if he charged a vehicle, survived the Overwatch and tagged it in combat, that vehicle could then do nothing else. It was stuck and it had to back away the next turn, and if it moves after it pulls out of combat, it couldn't shoot. So vehicles are getting really kind of pushed out of the meta, if you want, or the usefulness of their life, because they were getting tagged in combat and then they were no good. So these monsters and vehicles can now fire into combat. So there's lots of things with the monster keyword, for example. Lots of Tyranids are probably very excited about this, I would imagine. So what this means then, so excluding all of those blast weapons that we just mentioned, we can now fire all of our other guns into combat. But firing at combat is -1 ballistic skill at that nearest unit that you're engaged with, or within this new engagement range. So things like our twin melter guns on the Dominus classes, all the stubbers, the melters, the auto cannons, Ironstorm rockets, Icarus cannons, all of that stuff are going to be good to fire in combat. So it kind of sounds all groovy for the big lads, right? Well, with every yin there is a yang, and we now have new terrain rules, and I want to talk about those briefly as well. The new terrain rules, then, we have 4 classes of terrain: a hill, obstacle, area terrain and building, and each piece of terrain on your battlefield must fulfill or be tagged with one of these new words. A hill is just part of the battlefield, does nothing else other than potentially block line of sight if it's quite tall or whatever, but offers no bonus protection other than that regular line of sight and making your battlefield look a bit more undulating, a bit more interesting than a flat board. An obstacle is going to be great for smaller models though. Infantry, beast or swarm models with an obstacle between them and a firer will get +1 to their save. There's no mention of them being in or butted up to a wall or a trench or anything like that. It just says between the firer and the target. But again, you have to be an infantry, beast or swarm model. We didn't really get much about area terrain or buildings just yet, but we have some terrain traits to talk about, and there seem to be quite a lot of these. So for example, there were some words that were given in 2 examples. We've got scalable, breachable, light cover, defensible, obscuring, exposed position, seem to be the ones that they gave an example for, but let's cover the ones that they did discuss. So terrain traits like light cover. Light cover will give you +1 to your save from ranged weapons, excluding invulnerable saves. So RIP my Tzeentch demons. They're just going to be stuck with their regular save. So if you're in a bit of cover, and you've defined that terrain as something with light cover, you're going to get +1 to your save. Heavy cover gives you +1 to save in the melee phase in combat, unless the model making the attack charged this turn. Again, excludes invulnerable saves. The good thing about all of this new keywords for terrain is that they all stack. There's no reason why you cannot have light cover and heavy cover on the same terrain feature, and that's going to be very likely. The big thing for knights though is the new word obscuring. So this means if your terrain feature is at least 5 inches high to the tallest point in a piece of terrain, so it doesn't matter whether it's just one big chimney up on one side, it counts for measuring the height of that terrain feature. Models cannot see through it. That's right, no more poking your little gun through the window, shooting across another window, and you can see the shoulder pauldron corner of a knight. That's not going to be happening. Well, we'll get to that in a second. It is going to be happening, but it's not for the majority of people. You can't sit there and pick, cross window shooting. So no matter how it's modelled, consider it a line of sight blocking piece. Imagine like a giant 3D render over the top of your terrain, and that is impenetrable to the eyes. There's 2 caveats to this though, which is where we're going to get impacted. Aircraft and models with 18 or more wounds are ignored for obscuring. That is, they are considered too big to be blocked. So most of our knights, in fact every knight except the Armiger class, has more than 18 wounds, which means our obscuring rule goes straight out the window for knights. Everyone will be able to see an Imperial Knight other than the Armiger. So that whole obscuring piece is gone for us. But the reverse would not be true. So if you've got 4 Havocs, for example, with las cannons through that terrain, the other side of the terrain, for example, they can see us, we can't see them. But if you're in the terrain feature, this rule is then not in play. But what you may get then is benefits from light cover or heavy cover and so on. Some of the other rules may kick in, but obscuring on the whole for knights is not going to be a thing to worry about, except when we want to shoot back at people, where they're going to be sat the other side of the terrain and they'll be shooting us and we'll be like, bro, I can't see you. But there are some preset examples of how these rules stack. So ruins, for example, are area terrain, scalable, breachable, light cover, defensible and obscuring. Now we've only heard rules about light cover and obscuring so far. We haven't really heard anything about scalable, breachable, defensible and defensible. But we could probably have an educated guess at what some of these others mean. So scalable is probably going to be you can move over it. Maybe there could be a reduction to your move. Breachable, I'd imagine you could walk through it like a door or something like that. Defensible, I do wonder whether that's going to give us a potential Overwatch bonus or something like that. I mean, that is a bit of a guess. I don't like to guess, but sometimes it can be a bit fun. Exposed position, though, not a clue. Not a clue what that could be. The second example they gave us was for armoured containers. Now, we've had these little armoured containers as a model kit. Everyone loves those things on their battlefield because they're so good in 8th edition for this line of sight thing. They're considered obstacles, light cover, scalable, exposed position. Note they don't have the obscured rule, so you don't consider them the actual height of the container. The 5-inch part. They are as exactly as they are modelled. So they can be climbed over. They do give you +1 to your cover, whether you're in it and also shooting across it because they're an obstacle. But this exposed position thing is on this particular terrain feature. But yeah, no idea what that could be. So some very interesting rules coming out that we're being teased so far. Most of them are going to impact us Imperial Knight players, right? So whether we're, the obscured rule is going to be a very, very critical one, depending on how you build your battlefield. And the new edition is talking about how terrain is going to work here. They give examples of how much terrain you should have on your board. The size of the board is also being reduced as a minimum guide. Moving and getting around buildings and pieces of terrain for Imperial Knight players is going to be essential. But the positive, though, is that Armigers can now kind of hide a little bit. So an all Armiger list could be well and truly on the menu, and I've spoken about that in a video previously. Not only with all of their new command points they're getting, instead of 3 or 4, 2,000 points of Armigers is going to get you 12. Lots of new opportunities open up. Blast weapons are going to be really cool. We're going to get lots more DACA down the range on those big horde units. But equally then, you're going to have to think about your big anti-tank weapons. Those melter guns, those big melter cannons, thermal cannons. They're a big damage weapon, but firing against a tank, you're still going to have to roll D6 to see how many shots you get. Firing against 11 or more models, we're going to get 6 shots. So, swings and roundabouts, an anti-tank gun, massive thing, firing into a load of gribblies, should give you more hits than a potential 1, right? But against a vehicle, 1 seems to be, or less than that many models, 1 model for a tank, probably going to make a lot of sense. So far, so good. Swings and roundabouts, a little bit of give, a little bit of take, especially that obscuring rule. So there we go then, guys, an action-packed week of new stuff. How heavy weapons work, how terrain's working, how blast weapons work, how terrain and combat and all that good stuff are going to work. How that's going to impact some of the larger models that, as an Imperial Knight player, that is what we are blessed with. The smallest being a little Armiger and the biggest being sort of the bigger casters classes and so on. Yeah, we're going to have a whole new world of tactics to learn once the full release of the rules is known. So this is kind of a mid-tier video, really, about just talking about some of the interactions that we're going to be having with Imperial Knights and how this is going to work against all the other factions as well when we start facing off once again against our enemies, or friends if you like, you know, when you get around for a game or down at your local gaming store. So it's going to be an exciting time as we move into 9th. Lots of changes, the meta is thrown in the bin, and we start from scratch and see how we get on. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to know in the comment section below your thoughts on how the new rules are going to work with Imperial Knights. But if you enjoyed this video in general, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.